Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. This panel session at the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance Global Summit is about strategic partnerships and creating the right environment for investments, and primarily obviously focused on connectivity, but trying to figure out partnerships that work in helping people get investments at an affordable rate for affordable access across the planet. With that, maybe I'll introduce myself. I'm Frank McCosker. If I could have my slides up, please. I run my own boutique consultancy, Global Good Networks, where I specialize in strategic partnerships, working with clients across the globe, with a significant focus on Africa. I also focus on TV white spaces and internet last mile connectivity projects. Another area of focus for us is affordable access to financing. I have previously spent 21 years at Microsoft, various roles, ending up with working at Microsoft for Africa for 5 years, investing in affordable access in Africa. Previous to that, looking after international organizations for Microsoft for a 10-year period, and previous to that, running sales and marketing services group for Central and Eastern Europe. So that's me and my consultancy. I'm the moderator today. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. So today we have Allan Ruiz Madrigal is the Executive Secretary of COMTELCA, which is an organization looking after telecom regulators and organizations across Central America, from Mexico through to Honduras, Costa Rica, Panama, and all of Central America, down to as far as Colombia, as far as I understand. And he'll be talking to us very shortly. We also have Mark Rotter, who's the General Manager of Africa for Adaptrum, and also the Treasurer of DSA, and has significant experience in connectivity in Africa and in spectrum regulation across the planet. After Mark, we'll be talking to Antonio, who is the lead telecom specialist and broadband platform coordinator at the Interamerican Development Bank. Antonio has a significant experience across many committees on connectivity, Internet for All at the World Economic Forum, and previously with Telefonica in Spain. After Antonio, we'll be talking to Rob Henley, who is the principal at Stadia Corporate Advisory. Rob runs a corporate advisory in South Africa, looking at investing and providing affordable finance to, among other things, connectivity and internet service providers. And finally, we're talking to Alex Hadden, who's the Director of Structured Finance and Insurance Department at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, previously known as OPIC. And Alex will be telling us a little bit about the new organization and what he does there. Alex has got extensive experience in investing across the planet in telecoms and last mile connectivity, and he'll be giving us an update on DFC's role and its continuing to change and its new mandates that it has around investing across the planet. So with that, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and give us sort of brief 5-minute introductory comments and perhaps 1 or 2 slides, and then we'll move to a Q&A session across the panel. So thank you very much. And Allan, could I bring you up?
Thank you.
And bring you into the discussion with this new system? Allan, I see you've got extensive experience across many organizations: Intel, General Electric, Nokia, Lucent, and you were Vice Minister of Telecommunications in Costa Rica. So with that introduction, I'd like you to take over and maybe give us some comments from your point of view about investing, the right environment for investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for your introduction. First of all, COMTELCA, it's an international organization that gathers 8 countries from Mexico to Panama, including Dominican Republic. And we basically were trying to use the ICTs in the spectrum in order to provide goodwill to all our citizens. And that's a big task. This organization was founded in 1966. And today is a very, very important organization for the region. And I think that the base of COMTELCA is very, very, nowadays, it's very updated, I would say. I mean, it's something that we need to pursue as it was founded. COMTELCA has, as I mentioned, 8 countries. Some of the members are regulators, but some others are from the ministers. And also we have Colombia, and it's an external member that recently joined. And we are able to work with all our regulators. As you mentioned, I have quite a few experience. I have been working with the spectrum for the last 32 years or so. And I've seen how the use of a spectrum have changed. And recently, it's amazing how it's impressive how a spectrum is important for the situation that we're going through with the COVID-19. After we got the COVID-19 this year, some of the countries have implemented some interesting projects that I would like to mention to you. Next slide, please. And I will start with Panama. That the Panama use a temporary spectrum for the pandemic. They use the AWS spectrum, and they assign that spectrum to their current providers. Something that I would like to highlight here is that the regulator has a lot of support from the government and a lot of support from their Congress. So with that, they will be able to assign this spectrum, I think, for 120 days or so. And then with the political support, they have extension for 3 more months. And this ignite the auction for the AWS spectrum for the next year. So that was something that I think that worked very well. They work in a good time, and it's something that probably in a current situation, the political will and political support were not aligned with this type of activities, and I think it's a very good example for what we're trying to do. Costa Rica recently had a public consultation on their frequency line chart, and they're working on a lot of issues on that public consultation. Some of them are spectrum for 5G, obviously, but they also have unlicensed spectrum on Wi-Fi and on 900 megahertz, which is something very important because even though 900 is not a free unlicensed frequency in our region, but it's also used for on the market. And the consultation it's in process, it's not ended yet, but it's going to be something very good for the sector and a good example for the region. In El Salvador, they have developed a project with white spaces, and that project was found by the U.S. Embassy in El Salvador with a project with I think with a foundation called for Millennium 2 or something like that. And that project provide like $277 million for that project. And what they're going to do is use the white spaces for connecting the south area of the country, which is a little bit left behind. They're going to provide connectivity for 230 schools, some hospitals, and this is going to be a very interesting project for the region and for the country itself. And also they were able to assign some budget for the next year for the development of that project. There's another thing in El Salvador that went on by the end of the last year. They assigned some AWS spectrum for the country, and after the pandemic, what happened was that the operators accelerate the installation, and they provide a little bit more broadband for the population, and also increase a little bit that broadband, all the broadband plans. And Dominican Republic is my last example for the countries. They have recently changed the government, and something really interesting happened, that the government, the president himself, took the digital technologies as one of the first thing on its agenda. That was something very good, because all the sector that we are looking to what Dominican Republic is doing, and we're paying a little bit more attention. And it was very interesting how the political message activated all the market and all the providers, and the entire sector is looking what they're doing. One of the first tasks they're doing is going with the digital divide. The 700 megahertz was like clear recently, and they're going to start next year on the process of auctioning that band. And in COMTELCA, where we're trying to do with the help of some of our members, we have members from the sector and from different organizations, and we are looking to the 5G spectrum. We're going to we're already analyzing what is going on with the 6 gigahertz, and what the options that we have, and what is more convenient for our region. We are still working on digital divide from some of the countries. Some of the countries are start to talk about the second digital divide, which is, I think, is a good thing for the entire region. And also, we are working on what we call the Agenda Digital Mesoamericana, which is another regional initiative that we are including in our plans. And that consists in to develop a digital agenda for 10 countries, basically the 8 countries for COMTELCA, and also including Colombia and Belize. So this is one of the just a few examples to show you, and I think that shows how the region is moving in terms of a spectrum. I hope that we will continue with this work, and consider the experiences of other countries, not only within COMTELCA, but what other countries are doing. We are very interested in the things that, for example, Colombia is doing in terms of the sandbox initiatives, and also what Mexico and even the US are doing. And we're trying to also try in understand what the regions as Europe are doing with the spectrum. And I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and more than willing to go through the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Allan. That was very, very useful, very informative. El Salvador, TV White Spaces, is Millennium Challenge Corporation. It's the U.S. agency for development, one of the U.S. agencies for development, and that's a very interesting project, as you say. Thank you. Very, very useful information, and a great regional view of what's going on and what is possible and what innovation is happening at the moment. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark. Mark Rotter and I used to work together at Microsoft, and he is the general manager since 5 years, I believe, of Adaptrum in Africa, and also the treasurer of DSA. Mark, with that introduction, I'll leave it to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing and what you see on the horizon. Thank you, Mark.
Great. Thanks, Frank. Very nice to meet all of you. I hope I add some value to the thinking, and just this group of folk in the room is a really key part of how to think about making successful projects into the unconnected in Africa specifically, but also unconnected elsewhere in the world. So Adaptrum is a OEM that does TV whitespace equipment. That's our specialization. We're really good at that. We really try hard to solve the issues that make connectivity affordable from a hardware point of view. That's really the core part of what we're trying to do. So what I would like to do is just talk a little bit through one project specifically that we've done in South Africa with a USTDA grant, and then just reflect on some of the lessons from that, but also more broadly from the other lessons that we've come across in Africa. So Adaptrum's done projects worldwide in just under 30 countries, and in Africa just over 12, I think, and with a variety of lessons. And I think the most exciting project for us has been the one which USDA has allowed us to do. And so let me just drill into that a little bit. So we were given $1 million grant. The idea is it's part of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency in the U.S. And as Adaptrum, as an American company, would like to, in other words, be involved in trade relationships with countries, which means that we are able to develop business deals. And so USTDA was very helpful to us in terms of giving us that grant. But it's not the grant is not the purpose of the project. The grant is to set up the thinking and the space correctly to be able to have the larger conversations around what barriers we need to cross to get to scale, because scale is the thing that's really important. So where we are so far, we've deployed in 3 different, deployed 8 hotspots in 3 different sites in South Africa, one in KwaZulu-Natal, one in a place near Johannesburg, and then another one in a very rural area in the northern part of South Africa. And the next step is that we will then run a low-cost, affordable connectivity project for consumers for a period, and make sure that we understand the commercial feasibility of that. The commercial feasibility is a model that we've had extremely good help from an organization which we have on the call, Stadia, to really understand what it takes at the right level of depth for a smaller operator to be able to set up and run profitably such a model. Okay? And what does that mean, profitably? It means that they're not making a loss at its most basic, but it also means that they need to think about really creative financing models. So what we've also done is we've taken a market research firm and done a very detailed market assessment that before we deployed the project, and we'll do a post-deployment survey as well. Really some interesting findings already from the pre-deployment survey, and I'm sure some of these things will be publicly shared. The results will end up in a group in South Africa, a wireless access group called WAPA, and WAPA has about 300 members, and they will be the beneficiaries of the financial model, the financing, the operational model, the technical model, the economic model. All of the different outcomes of the feasibility are created for the benefit of the WAPA members. So where we are at the moment is that we're kind of reflecting on some of the first round of lessons. The first one I would say is the importance of understanding the whole value chain, that it's not just connectivity on its own. I guess this is already something a bit older. So I kind of want to dive a little bit into the aspects that touch on the financing more, but it's really important that you have excellent partners, deeply knowledgeable, agile partners, and that includes folk for whom this might not be traditionally easy to do. For example, regulators. Agility and regulators is a tough call, because they have very strict rules according to which they need to regulate, and how do you make those decisions? So I just want to highlight one of the regulators in Africa that's been a real pleasure to work with, which is CA in Kenya, that have really kind of really tried to understand what the challenges are that you need to bridge in order to get to areas that it's perhaps harder to do in terms of the traditional telco model. And so they've time and again allowed a very creative engagement, which we've really enjoyed. I think the second thing is new types of operator models present opportunities and challenges. And for example, the one that is obvious to me and obvious to people who know me is we really need to make our equipment very cheap. Like there's no way around it. It really has to get to be very affordable. But that is a very, very hard game. And it's a game of very big numbers. So I kind of, my rule of thumb is sort of 100,000. 100,000 units makes a nice thing where you can get to affordable devices. And that means that you need big groups of countries in order to make the business model work, to get the cost of devices down to that sort of pricing. And or a project like USTDA, which unlocked the ability to properly investigate and talk about scale, right? That was one of the things that so you engage in the right level of conversations to do that. Another lesson from the project is not to be scared of radically different models. So in the last couple of years, we've really started hearing more about community networks. Thanks, Dan. And those have been extremely valuable. But also very challenging from a financing point of view. How does that work? Yeah. Also billing models. So for example, in South Africa, the poorest of the poor, low ARPU folk typically don't have a very good access to, certainly not credit cards, but even mobile money. The mobile money ecosystem in South Africa is not as well developed as the one in Kenya, for example. So how do you get that? And so there's a really creative vouchering system in South Africa, a company called Flash, and they are doing some very interesting things which reduce the risk of the project. I guess the most important thing for me is really the impact of financing on affordability, and specifically affordable financing on affordability. And one of the biggest eye-openers to me was that there are a number of buckets of money, and if one just knows how to deploy that bucket correctly. So in other words, as the project comes together, then one really needs to tie that up. And so, for example, we met with Exim, for whom currency hedging is a really a relatively easy thing to do and makes a lot of sense. So my bottom line is, I think that the affordable financing is really a key, and really understanding this topic deeply is a key to unlocking the future of connecting the unconnected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Indeed, affordable financing, that's the core issue. And we've been discussing it for some time now, over the years. But I think your project at USTDA really helps prove out that, and helps us to have some real numbers that we can show people on what difference affordable financing can make. On that, so I'd like to now pass over to Antonio. Antonio is the lead telecoms specialist at the Interamerican Development Bank. We've worked together for many years, and a great colleague. Antonio, can you give us a hemispheric perspective on what's happening in connectivity, and where the investments are, and what hurdles and how you're overcoming those hurdles at the IDB in your role? Over to you. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you so much, Frank, and thank you to the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance for being here, and congratulations for the great work that you are doing on precisely open up the discussion and improving the quality of the regulations that the governments are having on a particular topic, which is fundamental, the topic on spectrum. So thank you very much for having me here. So if you just can go to the presentation, I would just like to give you a quick overview on the type of things that we are seeing at the Interamerican Development Bank, and how we are precisely addressing all this discussion that we are here talking today. So the first message that I want to convey is that when we just have a look at that slide that you can see here, there is a gap, is an obvious gap and is a gap not only in terms of the position within the ranking in the Network Readiness Index, but also is a gap when we are observing the difference in terms of scoring. And if you just have a look at it, if we just pick up the leading country in Latin America, which is Chile, we just come up with a conclusion that is 25, ladies and gentlemen, 25 points below the leading country, which is Sweden. So in fact, one of the key messages that we are observing in the region is that there is a lack of financing. There is a gap of digital infrastructure of around $69 billion across all Latin America, and particular actions and policies related to spectrum are going to be fundamental to reduce the gap and to widespread the access, adoption, and uses of internet services around the region. So if you just can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and the following question that we made when we go to a particular country is, but everybody is very much aware of what is going on in terms of infrastructure gap, in terms of digital infrastructure gap. Everybody, because of the pandemic, is very much aware about the importance of this digital infrastructure to reduce this gap, to create a social inclusion, to improve the level of productivity across the country. But there is a lack of specific guidelines in which those investments should take place. So one of the type of things that we are trying to help the countries with is to define a methodology in which first they understand why they should invest in digital infrastructure. Second, what are the type of networks that they need to invest on? Like it could be aspects related to backbone, it could be aspects related to last mile, or it could be even aspects related to international internet connectivity. And we have a number of cases, starting from Mexico, going to Paraguay, or the cases of Central America that my former speaker, Allan Ruiz, was mentioning. So it's very, very important to have a clear idea of what is exactly the gap that we have, not only in terms of magnitude, but also in terms of how that gap could somehow contribute to social and economic development. Then we need to understand that there is a particular symbiotic relationship between the public and the private sector. We cannot just rely on private sector to go and attend rural areas, because it's impossible. I mean, it's not even happening in Nordic countries, so less possible is going to be in developing countries. So there is a role to be played by the public sector in supporting the private sector investment in providing particular policies and regulations in such a way that is facilitated that investment, and most importantly, to guarantee the sustainability. So the partnership between the public and the private sector is becoming more important than ever before. And in addition to that, there is also important decisions to be made about how the management of the network could take place, not taking into consideration those supervision or what is going on in the network, but in terms of guarantee the quality of services, in terms of guarantee that those services that we are providing to schools, hospitals, or any other public location or municipalities are precisely the one that they are requiring. And in addition to that, there is also a need of establishing some sort of relationship between that investment and the national strategy or the national broadband plan. And this is another piece of information that we are observing that is lacking in the region. So there is some sort of miscommunication between the policy side and the implementation of those investment plans that either the public or the private side are doing. So it's very important to establishing some sort of connection and relationship between those national broadband plans and the country strategies that they are trying to put in place. If you just please go to the next slide. And in doing this, we will realize that there is certain barriers that we need to address. And those barriers could take place from the demand side, or it could take place from the supply side. So one of the things that we are observing whenever that we are designing projects to support countries is that it is not just about infrastructure. And I see that my previous speaker was mentioning, it is not just about infrastructure. It's also about the policies that are coming along. And more importantly, it's also about the digital skills that the populations are needed in order for them to take the most out of that investment and out of that services that are put at those disposal. So particular policies in terms of how to support their communities, how to support the reduction of gender gap, and how to support the diversity, inclusion, and equality are going to be instrumental to guarantee that there is no difference between citizens that are connected versus citizens that are not connected. And the same is happening from the supply side. Taking into account the gap that we are observing in terms of investment, there is a particular role that we need to put in place in terms of subsidies, in terms of a universal service fund, or in terms of strategic policies associated to spectrum management and spectrum allocation in such a way that is precisely contribute to reduce that existing gap. So you can please go to the next slide. So as a conclusion, I would tell you, it's very important to have a look at those 5 steps. When we are having those conversations with the governments, I would say first is to encourage competition. So we cannot forget that there are many countries around the world, and specifically in Latin America, where the telecom law and the regulatory framework dates from last century. I'm saying from late 1990s or early 2000, where the concept of digitalization or where the concept of broadband, or of course the concept of 5G is not incorporating as part of that. So it's very important that we have a look at competition, the level playing field, and update that regulatory framework and policies in such a way that we facilitate that level playing field competition. The second part is to lower cost structure. And here, I think that it's very important to understand that a particular regulation associated to infrastructure sharing are going to be critical to facilitate and accelerate that deployment. The third one is precisely spectrum release. In average, I would say that the situation of allocation in Latin America versus the recommendations from the OECD is far beyond. So there is a lot of actions that need to be taken by governments in order for them to put at the disposal of the private sector that spectrum in such a way that we can accelerate that deployment. Universal service funds are going to be instrumental for achieving those goals of universalities and contributing to reducing the financial gaps that we are observing. And last but not least, implement demand-side programs are going to be also very important, and establishing some sort of relationship between the national broadband plans and the national strategies that the governments are having to widespread the digitalization. So those will be like 5 key aspects of a strategy that we need to look at, and that it will be like the takes away from this presentation. Thank you very much, Frank, again for the opportunity and having me here.
Thank you, Antonio. That is absolutely amazing. Sort of summary of 10 years worth of work there. But what I take away from that are 4 key things. There's a $69 billion gap in funding. Public-private partnerships are really, really important, more than before. Skills, digital, we all keep forgetting that we need to finance and need to improve the skills for it to improve uptake. And lastly, the sort of notion that the spectrum policy update needs to happen quicker and needs to happen more often as the technologies are moving much faster than the policies are. So with that, Antonio, thank you so much. We'll come back to you. Now I'd like to turn over to Rob Henley, who is the principal at Stadia Corporate Advisory. Rob has been in the finance industry since 1996, initially with UBS in London and then in Hong Kong. And since 2011 has been running Stadia Corporate Advisory, previously known as Prescient. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon. So that's correct. We are Stadia Corporate Advisory. And we're a boutique advisory firm who specialize in raising capital for entrepreneurs running companies and projects across all of Africa. We're based in Cape Town. We've raised about $350 million over the last 7 years in a variety of industries, including TMT, and across, I think it's now 16 countries in Africa. But we've also done some TMT deals in India as well. When we started the business back in 2013, we had the same refrain from all sorts of range of investors, from development banks to venture capital to private equity to specialist TMT funders, that although there were a lot of companies, there weren't enough good companies who were investor ready. So we took our buy-side experience and we paid particular focus to working with companies we saw to have a lot of promise and make them investor ready, and those which were, we then looked to raise capital for them. We've been working specifically with Microsoft for 6 years now on affordable access, across the world, Africa, India, Indonesia, just Colombia in Latin America, and the US. We've also been working for the last year on the project that Mark Rotter described earlier with US TDA. So with that, we've obviously experienced a multitude of business models and characters and issues, particularly around bankability. Many of them actually, although they look different, end up being the same sort of issue. And in Africa, there's I guess the additional overlay of having a very, very strong dominant telco companies, the MNOs, and a regulatory environment which is not always so transparent. The MNOs have typically taken the easy territory, leaving affordable access to the less to people who are looking to build networks in less densely populated and poor populations. And I think over particularly the beginning of the 7-year period, what proved to be a very difficult business model was build and they will come. It's hard to sell the story of building a lot of infrastructure and hoping for big signups and high weekly or monthly revenues. And yet TMT is a scale game, so this is a bit of a paradox which needs to be solved. I guess this year has been dominated by coronavirus, and although the digital divide has been spoken about for a number of years, this year has really highlighted the need to bridge it. So in some ways, the tackling affordable internet access has got a bit of an opportunity now, because there's a whole raft of seemingly basic services. I'm sure if you have children, you've do some e-schooling, some shopping, some e-med. So governments and NGOs and foundations are increasingly recognizing the need to break down this digital divide, so there's not a uneven development in their countries. And that's also brought similarly some different sorts of funding instruments and different pockets of capital which are now looking more intent at bridging this digital divide. So this particular session, the title was focusing on forming strategic partnerships to improve investment and ROI. And I guess from dealing with entrepreneurs mainly, the big aspect about having great partners is basically giving confidence to investors to back you, to really give all other partners a kind of confidence in the validation of your strategy. And potentially it also offers credit worthiness in the revenue streams, which is actually all important in connectivity, particularly in emerging markets. And again, you can probably split these up into two different parts. One is who are your partners to deliver the project in terms of technology. So be that corporate governance structures, equipment suppliers, fiber, backbone, other forms of technology partners. It's validating to have those kind of people in your deck, just so that investors, for example, know they're dealing with companies who who've been recognized as being proper players, serious players in their market. Now, I think the second one is financial. So when it comes to bankability or making sure that the returns work, we'll hear from Alex in a minute, but I think that one is getting more bankable revenue generation, whether that's through larger corporates or governments or master distributors who can be part of making the business scale quicker, or whether it's getting cheaper capital. I mentioned earlier some blended finance structures which are increasingly being brought in. And obviously, if you have funders, be they grant or be they soft or developmental capital, if you can bring the cost of capital down, that obviously mobilizes other forms of capital as well. When you have recognizable partners on your cap table in that regard, it's always reassuring for all the other partners who are involved. So those would be my opening comments on this forum.
Thank you, Rob. Again, partnerships. It's a running theme for everyone. I think have the right strategic partners to go to market and to get the right investment. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Rob, and switch over to Alex. Alex is the Director of Structured Finance at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. And Alex, maybe we can explain the move from OPIC to DFC, so that for the audience, because I know you've spoken here before as OPIC. And also, maybe Alex, in your comments, maybe talk specifically about some new partnerships that DFC has been working together in the most recent past on developing pipeline and developing projects. So with that, Alex, I'll hand over to you to tell us a little bit about what you do and see if you can incorporate those two questions. Thank you, Alex.
Great, thank you, Frank. Pleasure to be part of the financing panel again here for DSA. I do have some slides, if we can call those up, to walk through some of the exciting changes that have happened as OPIC has transitioned to the DFC. So if we take a look at the first slide, you'll see that fundamentally the agency, which is the U.S. government's development finance institution, has kind of the same three pillars at its core. We are still focused on global impact and development. We are a U.S. government agency, so U.S. foreign policy is central to all of the opportunities that we finance, and we do operate on no net cost to the U.S. taxpayer, meaning that we are charging commercially oriented fees and interests for the financing that we're providing. As it relates to global development, the DFC has over the last year and really over the last administration focused on a couple key areas. One has been gender empowerment. We have what's called the 2X initiative, which several of our kind of peer DFC institutions have also implemented similar programs to facilitate the ownership and management of projects that we support by women, and also to support projects that are implementing services or providing services and products that support women specifically. Also on global development, the agency always has regional priorities. The Indo-Pacific has been a big area of focus recently over the last several years. Sub-Saharan Africa is a big area. We have a program called Connect Africa where we're trying to mobilize $1 billion in investments. Globally, we are in over 100 countries. primarily your World Bank defined low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, upper middle-income countries. It's very difficult for us under the new DFC to be in any high-income markets. As it relates to U.S. foreign policy and this sector specifically, national security has, I think, risen as a focus of the agency, and there's a lot of discussion now about 5G networks and what the U.S. government's considering trusted vendors' ability to build those networks and deploy those networks with operators globally. We are working to support infrastructure development in markets that are using trusted vendors, and that's everything from subsea cable to data centers to mobile network operators. If we go to the next slide, we'll see some really the key aspects of how the DFC is different from OPIC. It's been just actually over a year now, looking at my calendar, since the DFC was created, and the big changes, other than the name of the institution on my business card, is that we have some new tools to support businesses globally. And a big and exciting new tool is the equity tool. Previously, we did not have authority to do equity investments, either on a direct basis, to a counterparty or or through investment funds. We have approved our first equity investments. I think this product is going to be particularly relevant to the sector that everybody on this call is interested in as it relates to technology and telecommunications. A lot of opportunities that probably Rob at Stadia sees really would benefit and are interested in raising higher degrees of kind of pure risk capital, first loss capital, and may not actually be quite ready or suitable for long-term senior debt financing just because of where they are in their kind of maturation cycle. Maybe they haven't proven cash flows out yet to support debt financing. And so equity could be a really important new tool that the DFC has to support operators and projects that are in the telecom space or the technology space. We have the political risk insurance product, which has always been one of the agency's core products, covering things like currency inconvertibility and political violence and terrorism in markets. Our authorities have increased. So previously, we were doing up to about 250 million. The current administration has raised our authorities, and so we can cover a significant degree of exposure, which you might see for large infrastructure projects, less common for smaller projects. However, this is a product that truly does suit investors, regardless of the size of the investment. So we can really cover much smaller exposures than our upper limits. Debt financing, another core kind of finance tool. Both doing direct loans and also providing guarantees for local banks or for U.S. capital markets issuances. Again, our exposure limits have increased with this product, so we have the capacity to do up to $500 million in financing. But we really are evaluating opportunities that are probably between, traditionally probably between 10 million and 500 million. Although we don't have a low limit really. And then finally, technical development on this slide. We have some new tools, and these are DFC tools that didn't previously exist with OPIC, where we can do or finance rather technical assistance on projects. So these would be like marketing studies or feasibility studies. And the way that we've been, because it's a new authority and much like equity, we were really, understanding how to deploy these new resources. Right now, most of our thinking is around how can we use this authority to help groups that we're financing with our kind of core investment products to provide additional services that will do, one of two things: either increase the impact of the actual investment, or to make the investment more sound, improve the credit profile or the bankability of that investment. And then If we can go to the next slide, just to give you a sense of what types of assets we're really financing here. We're doing, mobile tower cos globally. I did some of that work in Peru and Ecuador recently. We have a big transaction in Ecuador. Historically, we've been very involved in sub-Saharan Africa and towers. Increasingly looking at infrastructure like terrestrial fiber and data centers that really underpin global networks. And we're also looking at, businesses that are probably more relevant to the DSA, anything that's operating a wireless network, wireless internet service providers. And we've done everything from your kind of traditional MNOs using licensed spectrum to people using TV white space and unlicensed spectrum. And we do all of this, with partners. We're only as successful as the partners that we work with. Recently, we announced signing an MOU with Microsoft in this regard to help finance their pipeline of network operators and technology developers. And so I think, in the Q&A here, we'll give you a sense of a little more depth about what we look at in each of these opportunities. But as you can tell, we truly have a global reach at the DFC, and we can really touch upon a lot of different sectors. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks a lot. Absolutely. That's very exciting news about the Microsoft MOU. And glad to see that you're looking at data centers as well. The technology spread of connectivity is moving well beyond, obviously, just connecting people to the total infrastructure. So with that, we're going to move to the Q&A section. And I'd like to sort of just give a couple of comments around the McKinsey report that came out earlier this year. And it talks about a little bit about the productivity gap. And it says, with the current installations of current connectivity, there is a $2 trillion productivity gap that can be filled with current installations. That doesn't count what we could do if we connected another 4 billion people. But it highlights some issues, which I wanted to just put to the panel to think about. And the questions are still open. Can telcos capture long-term economic value by partnering with business in other domains? And this is something that they traditionally haven't done very well. What will the connectivity ecosystem look like in 10 years' time? And what new players might enter? The members of DSA are probably all pertinent in that discussion. Will companies opt to build their own private networks rather than rely on public services? Big question. To what extent will processing migrate to the edge? And that's a very interesting question. And lastly, will telcos continue to struggle with monetizing consumer content? And those questions are contextual around telcos today. For the broad audience on listening to this, this is the environment we're operating in. Things are changing very rapidly. Technology is changing very rapidly. And it's a question about where do we invest to meet where the puck is going, as they say in hockey terms, rather than where it is today. So with that, a lot of other changes are happening in the environment. So this is a question to the whole panel. How are market changes, COVID or regulation, affecting financing of connectivity? Maybe Antonio, could you start us off, and then we'll go around the room.
Thank you, Frank. I think that is undeniable that the pandemic is changing everything from different perspectives. So I will just to give you a quick overview of how I see this. From the perspective of the government, we are observing that there is a major change in the sense that they are prioritizing this particular topic on digital connectivity, digital infrastructure, and all the services that are coming along. And this is top part of the agenda that we have with the different governments. So I would say governments are putting a lot of emphasis and are putting a lot of efforts on this particular thing. From the perspective of the private sector, same thing. I think that telecom operators has realized that they are playing a major role, but at the same time, we observe, all of us, the society, the civil society, the governments, and even the private sector, we have observed that there are particular areas that remain unconnected and that there is a joint effort that they need to do. And the telecom operators accepted that somehow, I think. So this opened up the window for new opportunities in terms of new innovation technologies, such as white spaces or any other innovative model that could be put in place in such a way that this is spread out. And third, from the perspective of the final users, we realize that there is a new concept, which is the concept of critical infrastructure, understanding that having access and having connectivity is a critical aspect for the society as a whole. So there is a whole change that is happening also from the consumption pattern and from the way in which they are addressing the day-to-day of business.
Thank you, Antonio. I think that point about critical infrastructure and people understanding that the internet is now critical infrastructure is very, very important and is changing the financing profile, frankly. Allan, would you care to comment on the question?
Sure. I would like to say, first of all, that the pandemic has shown us something that we already knew, that connectivity was very, very important, but with a different twist. Connectivity is now an essential tool. It's we need connectivity, but not a simple connectivity. We have a significant connectivity. That connectivity needs to be affordable. That connectivity is providing us with the right to work, the right to receive education, the right to receive health, among other things. And basically, we are dealing here with something that regulators and policymakers on technology didn't deal with before, which is human rights. Yeah. And I would say that I agree with Antonio, this is critical, but it's also a thing, it's a survival. Now, without connectivity, you're not going to be able to survive. We have approximately 32 kids without education, without access to education today in Latin America. And I think what we're doing is compromising the future. So we need to focus on connectivity. We need to focus on that connectivity to be significant, affordable, and meeting significant takes another meeting too. We need connectivity that is intelligent, in connectivity that provides not only the typical connectivity, but also the right tools, the right content, and we need more than train or provide digital skill. We need to empower our population to be able to be productive within broadband access that we have. And saying that, I think that from regulators and from policymakers, we need to align them into how we can provide a fair feel of where we can have a public policy where it has a meaning, so something that we can actually do, provide legal certainty for inversions. The regulator needs to have a simplified model of regulation with no artificial costs. And that is something easy to say, but not that easy to implement, because there's the first ingredient that we need here is political will. And as Antonio said, we need the governments understand what is happening here. The spectrum cost need to be evaluated in terms of what we can get from it, not in terms of social, economic, and human rights.
So yeah, on that note, I think there's a notion that the UN that the internet connectivity or connectivity is becoming a human right, and that spectrum is a global public good, and maybe that will change how things are looked at. And that's an evolution that's happening. It's not a single thing that's happening, but those important things to consider. Alex, maybe your thoughts.
Well, as far as where the market's going, I mean, most bankers aren't technologists, and so really it's our partners that have a stronger view than that. And so probably a lot of members of the DSA are way ahead of certainly me in that regard. But that's why these partnerships that we do with groups like Microsoft are pretty key. I mean, they understand how technology affects, or can affect agriculture, education, et cetera. And so we really do rely on the clients that come to us seeking financing to understand the opportunity a lot of the time. And, that starts with just a really well-written pitch deck and business plan, quite honestly, that somebody like, Rob at Stadia might have worked on, for instance, or supported on. As far as COVID is concerned, two big things. I mean, I think we've kind of covered that the sector, yes, is essential too. It's outperforming in a lot of ways. I mean, the bandwidth demand and data usage numbers are just kind of through the roof in a lot of markets. And so the fundamentals of the business opportunity for, data or broadband specifically have been really resilient. And that would imply, therefore, more financeable. However, operationally, COVID is as equally a challenge for operators as it is any other business. I mean, we have clients that we finance that have spent, $1 million on PPE, that have had to get new types of office space because, a lot, especially in emerging markets, people are running these really densely populated call centers. They're relying on teams of people to install fiber and antennas and even do kind of cash collection for service when digital payment mechanisms aren't available. And so there's a degree of irony where huge segments of the economy have relied on these kind of telecommunication services to stay at home and work. But the reality is, to build a network and to run a business efficiently, you're really dealing with some of the same fundamental pandemic policies as really any other business. And that has been, as a development agency, recognizing where those challenges are, building flexibility within what the use of proceeds of financing are, recognizing that monies might be diverted from some capital equipment to go into PPE or new office space. I mean, that's where we've been putting a lot of focus recently. And presumably, we'll get through this COVID era and these businesses will be more operationally resilient, just like the fundamentals of their business are on the marketing side. But it is very much the challenge of today.
Thanks, Alex. Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
It was very interesting watching the response by the government to COVID in the sense of both the amount of money they put into it, as well as the importance they gave to the internet. Right, so there was a clear understanding. We need to do something about this, and let's put a whole chunk of money into it. And that whole chunk of money ended up initially being sort of $10 million. So a really tiny amount. Okay. Compared to what the mobile operators have been paying over the years. So ironically, the good, reliable investment environment created by the mobile operators, which keys us to the investment queues, is almost the opposite of what one needs for getting to the rural areas. And in a sense, addresses the fact that 10 million is all they have at the moment, right? How can we do more affordable things? We really need to seriously do affordable equipment. Otherwise, we just won't make the cost and the benefit meet. And it's been very interesting to see the openness to then, for example, dynamic spectrum. We've seen a number of regulators really engage seriously with the DSA now in terms of opening up in this time of COVID, but also generally kind of seeing, I guess, what we've hopefully preached for a while, that these things really bring cost savings, right? The model is it allows us to be lighter and thinner and leaner in terms of how we get to the market, and it's really now a time to test that, and I think there's an openness to that. So Ramaphosa's plan was the fourth industrial revolution, right? So the investment behind that, so an understanding of the value chain is sort of there, right? That you need to get the right skills in place, but you also need to have the connectivity in order to be able to do that. So I think it's an exciting time.
No, I agree. It's quite interesting. SpaceX Starlink announced its pricing today, and the first question was about affordability. in rural America, and I think they're quite affordable. But it was affordability then latency. It's interesting. Those are two comments. But anyway, Rob, over to you. Make your comment brief, and then we're going to do one more question because we're running out of time. Sorry. Oh, you're on mute. That's the other thing I'm putting.
Excuse me.
That's right.
Excuse me. Another coronavirus problem. Yeah. So, thank you. I think everyone's made some really good points there. I think whilst we're trying to be comprehensive in solving so many issues with broad internet connectivity, I think we've got to reflect that there are some I guess services which governments have typically rendered which are covered by internet connectivity, such as health and education, but which aren't really necessarily a business model that that the poorer rural can actually afford. So that's where whether it becomes a PPP with government, whether there's a you build the backbone and the roads and trade and business will come. We might be giving a lot of credit to governments, unfortunately, to mobilize themselves and organize themselves to really let that happen in some emerging markets. So it still remains the case that to start on virgin turf with investable business models is a challenge. And it needs to be worked on with a lot of different stakeholders in order to make it bankable.
Thank you, Rob. So, panelists, we're coming to the end. So I'm going to ask you all one more question and make some final comments together. I'll make some comments right at the end. But yeah, the question is, are you seeing anything new in terms of innovative financing? And with the context of and the view that we'll probably be having long-term low/negative interest rates going forward in the developed world, and how is that affecting investments in the developing world? And how is that affecting your financing and perhaps your view of financing? And sort of just combine that with, is connectivity one of the highest priority items now when we look at financing? So I'd like to just turn to Alex first on that, and maybe if you could just maybe tackle the question and also give some final comments from your point of view, because we're short on time. Thanks. Over to you, Alex.
Okay, well, so on innovative financing, I mean, it's two things. One, there's the innovation in the business models themselves. And so certainly at the DFC, we have increasingly shown a capacity to support, businesses that were using non-traditional methods to deliver wireless broadband. So, I mean, using unlicensed spectrum is something that we've actually supported a few businesses that are using, and TV white space is another example. As far as, in the age of COVID, we've looked at trying to identify financing opportunities that relate to addressing the health pandemic directly. We created a $4 billion facility to support mostly our existing customers, to provide liquidity to them, and fast track new approval so they could address the crisis. Bankers have been around for ages, really since the days of Venice, and it's all fundamentally about just risk versus reward. And I think what's interesting is that the technology itself is becoming less of a fundamental in the underwriting, and the fundamentals of the business are superseding the technology. And what that means is, great if you can use Mark's Adaptrum technology. Great if you can use Ericsson. I'm sorry I said that, Mark. Great if you can use, one of these O-RAN providers that are trying to find, through different system integrations, a way to provide wireless. It's all great. What it has to be, as Mark said, it has to be affordable. If it's not affordable, nobody has access to the service. And I think that, at least from the development bank community, the technology itself, so long as it's ubiquitous and it does what it says, it's become less of a discussion at like, an investment meeting or a credit underwriting. As far as the interest rate environment, that's a complex issue. I think that our borrowers have benefited from a lower cost of funds because our cost of funds is pegged to the U.S. Treasury rate. Fundamentally, our risk margins have not changed that much because the sector has been resilient, so that the risk component stays the same, but our cost of funds comes down.
Yep.
I think there's broadly a flight to quality in markets probably does not benefit smaller telco operators or smaller WISPs, just because people are looking to reduce risk right now. However, that being said, the markets are starving for yield, and so probably for the larger corporates, the more incumbent telcos, they actually may have opportunities if their fundamentals are strong to refinance or to raise financing that look relatively preferable to what they've normally raised, just because institutional investors are just starving for places to put capital that return higher than 0%. And then finally on interest rates, interest rates affect foreign exchange rates. Foreign exchange is a real issue for this sector because a lot of technology and financing is in US dollar, but revenues are not. And how interest rates and foreign exchange rates move may not be as correlated as it normally is, just because there's so many other macro issues going on. But if I knew the answers to those questions, I'd be a very wealthy man.
Well, exactly. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for your participation in the panel as well. Rob, over to you.
Yeah. I echo Alex's comments, particularly on the less established operators. It's investors seem to have wound in their risk appetite, understandably so. What I think we're going to see increasing amount of is a bundled internet offerings. To give an example, there's a company in Nigeria who's in the education space. They can sell so many curriculum per annum, but what they've strategized is that if they add on an extra $5 with connectivity, they can take that curriculum to a great multiple to their existing client base. So this is a situation where they're kind of making their own market, and I think in the absence of obvious solutions to build broad networks, that's going to be an area which is going to be attractive both for the companies and also for the funders themselves, because they can immediately see measurable impact and a marketplace for the product.
Yeah, that convergence. Absolutely, Rob. Thank you so much, and thanks for coming on the panel. Allan, could you maybe give your final comments?
Yes. Antonio shows a very interesting chart where there's an indicator where our countries are situated, and we are basically on the bottom of that chart. Every single country has different challenges, and before the pandemic, we already have that situation, and the economical situation of each country is critical, I would say. And what the pandemic has shown us is that this is a global problem, and a global problem needs global solutions. And I think that international cooperation, it's very, very important. Institutions like IDIB that Antonio worked with and is helping us a lot, I think it's a key instrument to the next steps, especially if we want to provide coverage to the less fortunate, which is the rural and the gender gap, especially the gender gap.
Yeah.
So I think with what we're doing here is it's trying to convince our governments that we cannot do this alone. We need to be not only with the financial support, but also with the knowledge. Right now, for example, we're dealing with, as Antonio mentioned, with regulation that it was made 20 or more years ago. And right now we're facing a regulation that needs to deal with who is monetizing the data of our users.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about the digital platforms, that they work in a global way. And we need to understand that the competition have changed a lot. It's not who uses more minutes or who provider has more clients. It's who monetize the data. And we need to understand that. We need to help the countries to understand what are the changes that we need to have in order to have more productivity and in order to lower our costs. And this is a big challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Allan. And just on that, there's a very good book by Jaron Lanier called "Who Owns the Future." I encourage you to look it up. But it's all about data and how data will be managed in the future, i.e., by you, not by everybody else. Antonio, over to you for your final comments and maybe tackling the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. I would like to conclude with two main, 2 points that I haven't said before. Point number one is about the governance model. I think that it's very important that we think about the institutional framework that is required to make sure that these initiatives related to universality of broadband services and internet services is guaranteed. So this is a cross-cutting, let's say, service, or you want to put it that way. And not only the ministries or the ministers dealing with ICT are the ones that are called to have a particular action. I would say Ministry of Education, Health, and Minister of Finance himself is also very much needed in having an open discussion, an open debate on how to make this really universal. And second point is precisely related to Minister of Finance. I have a feeling that we need to bring them into the discussion. I think that there is a co-responsibility between governments, multilateral development banks, civil society, and operators in how to work together to make this really happen. There is a huge amount of budget all over the world. There is huge amount of support and grants that are being given to developing countries by different MDBs. But we need to define a common strategy, a common goal on how we can work together to make the service really, really universal. And in this particular discussion, Minister of Finance are called to have a major role and a major discussion. On this particular
I couldn't agree with you
discussion.
more, especially when it concerns schools. Thank you. The Ministry of Finance question. Mark, final comments, and thank you for being on the panel. Mark, you're on mute.
Yes, I also want to echo what Antonio just said. Especially in many of the emerging markets, it is the discussion around loss of licensing revenue versus future tax income from connecting more folk is really, it's difficult because it's in one election cycle that you have to take people with you, right? And so including them in the conversation and perhaps engaging and saying, what does the new financial model look like if government deeply thinks about it, and we can put in low capex, affordable spectrum, reused spectrum, some of these smart technologies, smart financing into the mix that allows to think about really vastly connecting more people in the markets that are not connected. That would be for me the ask of those who watch this.
Thank you, and thank everybody on the panel. Thank you all for coming and spending your time with us today. The one concluding remark I would make is it's all about affordability. Affordability of finance, affordability of connectivity. If we focus on that one word, we will create the right environment for investment. With that, I'd like to pass over to Martha Suarez, the president of DSA, who wanted to make a couple of final comments on this panel. Thank you very much to the panel, and over to you, Martha.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for moderating this exciting session. It was great to hear about different organizations and companies about their vision for affordable access and in general for the right conditions to promote investment. So really thank you very much for all the speakers. And I just wanted to give a final remarks for all those that are watching this session. Please keep participating at the DSA Summit, and also feel free to share these informations and to continue the discussion afterwards. So I hope you enjoyed this session, and as I did, that you heard very nice information and very good insights, and look forward to seeing you in the next sessions of the DSA Summit. Thank you.